Hello everyone, welcome back to another Quantum Mike Classic. As you might know by now, the Quantum Mike was a podcast prior to being a YouTube channel. And when I hosted the Quantum Mike podcast back a few years ago during COVID, I did interviews with physicists or people involved in physics and talked to them about their research and sort of their experience in the physics community. Since I have all these interviews, I thought it would be good to allow these to be available on YouTube so you can listen to them. Today, we're going to do my interview with the lovely Dr. Daniel Whiteson, where we talk about experimental particle physics, his book back in, what year is it? 2021. So it's a little bit out of date. But at the time, there was a book coming out, and just more about science communication as well. So please enjoy. It's a really good episode. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Quantum Mike. As always, I'm your host, Owen, and today we'll be talking to author, podcaster, app developer, and particle physicist at the University of California Irvine, Dr. Daniel Whiteson. Thank you for joining me today, Daniel.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm really excited to chat.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that you agreed to come on the show. Now, would you mind, I know I kind of gave a small synopsis of who you are, but would you mind introducing yourself a bit more, telling the listeners a bit more about yourself, who you are?
Sure. So I'm Daniel Whiteson. My day job is that I'm a professor of physics at the University of California at Irvine, which means that I do things like teach big classes like introductory physics and also graduate classes on particle physics. But most of my time in my day job is spent doing particle physics research, which means that I smash tiny particles together at really high energies to try to figure out what is stuff made out of. Basically, I want to know the answer to the question, what is everything in the universe built out of? What are the most fundamental building blocks and how do they fit together? And the only way I know how to figure that out is to break stuff around us into smaller and smaller bits. And so that's my day job. That's what I spend most of my time doing. But I also have a lot of fun side projects because I get excited about things.
You do seem to have a lot of side projects.
I do. That's one of the
awesome.
benefits of tenure, is that you get to do crazy stuff that maybe your boss would frown on, but you don't really have a boss. So you basically get to spend your time doing what you're interested in.
Well, so you said that you're a particle physicist. That's your main occupation. So why particle physics? Of all the fields of physics, right? The solid state, astrophysics, astroparticle. Why particle physics in particular? What sort of led you that way?
It's a great question because it wasn't a direct path. I discovered after many, many trial and error experiences in physics research that not everything that sounds exciting is actually fun to work on. When I got started in physics, I was, of course, absorbed by the night sky and the stars and all that stuff. And I joined astronomy clubs. But then I discovered that, I don't actually enjoy staying up in the middle of the night and looking through telescopes. Like, it's not really that much fun for me. I like thinking about the universe. I like hearing about it, but I didn't need to be actually involved in the looking through telescopes. And so I thought, well, what else is exciting? And there's a big research lab in my hometown. I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Of course, famous home of the Manhattan Project and, massive physics lab. So I had a lot of options to choose from of what to get involved in. And I thought it might be fun to do plasma physics because I thought, what's important is like energy. And maybe we could crack fusion and have unlimited free energy. And that seemed important. So I joined a research group doing plasma physics. And most of the time was spent, trying to get the vacuum chamber, down to very, very low atmospheres and doing calculations to understand the plasma flow. And it was just not something that sat well in my brain. It's just like so many particles all at once, swishing around, bouncing off each other. I just couldn't really get my mind around it. And honestly, I didn't have fun. It just was not like a fun experience day to day. So the next summer, I tried something different. I worked in a condensed matter research lab where basically you're firing lasers at different kind of materials to try to make them do new weird stuff. And that sounded really cool, except that if you have a laser and it's made out of like 100 components, each of which work like 99% of the time, it basically never works. It's basically always something broken. So I spent a whole summer in a basement tweaking this laser, and like there were like 6 magical hours where everything was working and we got some data. And, some other kids in that research summer, they loved it, tweaking optics and playing with things and getting it to work. But it drove me crazy. And then the next year, I took a class in particle physics, and I thought, wow, this is really cool stuff. Trying to understand the very, very smallest bits. It sort of like clicked in my head nicely. But, I was wary because I already knew that just because you're excited about the big questions of a field doesn't mean you enjoy the day-to-day work, right? It's not like we're discovering new particles every day. But I spent a summer working on particle physics, and I discovered, hey, it's mostly computation. You're writing programs to analyze data and do statistical calculations. And that's actually kind of my jam because I was a major in physics, but I was also doing a major in computer science. So I love like building programs and developing statistical machinery, and all that kind of stuff was super fun for me. So what I learned, the short version of the story, is that you have to find a part of physics where you are excited about the big questions, but also where the day-to-day craft is fun. And it took me a few tries to find the one where I had sort of both connections.
That's actually a great story to hear, especially as I'm an undergraduate trying to figure out what sort of physics I'd like to do, and thinking, oh no, if I go into this, am I going to be stuck into this one field? And you've sort of seemed to have bounced around
I
from
certainly
all
did.
over.
And my advice to undergrads in physics is get started early because it can take a while to find out where you fit in. And don't be shy to say something is boring. Like I knew my summer in plasma physics was going to be boring on day 2, but I didn't say anything. I just sort of like struggled through it the whole summer. So speak up if speak up if you're bored and if you'd rather do something else because your professor or your mentor would like you to have fun.
So since you did a lot of fields before you fell on particle physics,
Mhm.
was that all of that done in your undergraduate, or was that some of that grad work, or just a year off of doing a degree and just sort of working, taking a job in like a gap year at a laboratory as
Yeah,
like a general assistant?
those were each summer experiences. So I started pretty early, and I did my first experience, after my freshman year, and then another one after sophomore year, and this kind of stuff. So I started pretty early trying to get research experience because I was curious, and also because I lived in a town where there's a huge physics lab, so I had a lot of easy opportunities there. But I was pretty sure that I was going to do particle physics by the time I was a junior. And then I spent my senior year doing particle physics research during the year, also academically. Um, and then I actually did take a year off to go do physics research in Copenhagen at the Niels Bohr Institute before I started grad school.
Wow. Well, that's quite a journey to end up where you are. So it sounds like you're more of an experimental particle physicist. And if I read your your little bio on the web page about you,
Mhm.
is that you are more of an experimentalist and you work at Atlas. That's right. Correct?
I think, yeah, I'm officially an experimentalist, but the experimental physics community is very broad and made up of
Mm-hmm.
lots of different kinds of people. Like on the Atlas experiment, you have people who really just do nothing but build detectors because they are really interested in electronics and how to get high voltage and how to get clean gas into this thing, and that's their jam. And then you have people like me who mostly do like statistical analysis and develop new machine learning methods to extract the juice from the data. All different kinds of people. They're all lumped in as experimental physicists. I would say that in that community, I'm sort of more on the theoretical side and more on the statistical side than most of the experimental physicists, but I'm definitely not a theoretical physicist. Like nobody in the theory community would say that I'm a theorist.
That's pretty cool, yeah. And I kind of have I guess a reference point on that because I'm at Carleton, and at Carleton we have a bunch of our particle physics. Pretty much, Carleton has 2 fields of physics. They have a bunch of particle physicists, and half of them work at on Atlas as well. And my first year professor was a an experimentalist who was making pieces for the new small wheel, and that was all
Exactly.
that he was doing.
Exactly.
He was like, I am pretty much an engineer in the scale of physicists, of experimental physicists.
Yeah, and that's a years
Right.
long project. And they just installed the new small wheel very recently, lowered it down into the chamber. And some folks here at UC Irvine also worked on the new small wheel. It's a big project and it can take years and years. And that's why I think it's actually great that experimentalists specialize, that some of us are like excellent at this and some of us are excellent at that. Just like the rest of society, we don't all grow our own corn and make our own medicines. We specialize, which allows us to all be better at that one thing.
Yeah, it builds up, which is really useful for getting these
Hmm.
large projects done.
Hmm.
And with that in mind, so you said you work at Atlas and at the LHC. So what are you currently doing? Are you currently doing anything for the LHC? Because if my memory serves me correct, at the time that we're recording this, the LHC is currently sort of shut down, not running experiments while they're installing new pieces to the detectors and trying to upgrade it to the super luminescent LHC. So
That's right. Yeah, that's right. We are getting ready. We're setting up for the next run of the LHC, very high luminosity. And so you asked, what am I actually doing? Well, as most physicists, what I'm doing is analyzing the old bunch of data, helping prepare the detector for the next run, and ramping up to analyze the next bunch of data. So we still have a lot of like interesting physics questions that we can answer in the data we've collected so far and the collisions that we've made so far. I don't think we have exhausted those. But I'm also participating in the future improvements to the detector. So at Irvine, what we work on is mostly the trigger and data acquisition system. So the bits that like collect all the data from all the detectors and package it up nicely, and then decide like, hey, was this interesting or was it garbage? Make a keep it or kill it decision at the nanosecond scale. And I think that's really fun, like these really fast computer systems that have to be very elaborate and never, ever fail. I think that's a really fun challenge.
yeah. So actually, would you mind explaining a little bit of since you're working on Atlas, what the new upgraded LHC is going to be like? Because I know I've thrown around the super luminous LHC, but would you mind kind of explaining a bit more about that, especially since you probably have a better idea of how it's all kind of working?
Sure. Well, what we're doing at the LHC is, of course, we're smashing protons together at very high energy, and we're hoping that what happens is something interesting. You smash two protons together, and the most interesting thing about it is that you can't predict exactly what's going to happen. You can smash two protons together in exactly the same way twice and get different outcomes, thanks to the magic of quantum mechanics, right? Because physics doesn't say what's going to happen. The universe is not deterministic. It only determines what the probabilities of various things to happen are. So, what happens when you smash two protons together? Well, 99% of the time, it's really boring. Two protons come out. Nothing interesting happened. What we're looking for are the really, really rare things, like once in a billion collisions, maybe you'll get a Higgs boson. Maybe once in a trillion collisions, you'll make a black hole or something new we haven't seen before. So, in order to see the new interesting stuff, you have to do a lot of collisions. The more collisions the more collisions you make, the more rare stuff you see, right? It's just like, I don't know, panning for gold or sifting for jewelry on the beach. The more beach you search, the more likely you are to find something interesting. But you got to go through lots of grains of sand. And so we are at the sort of maximum energy we think we can achieve with the collisions, which limits like what we can make. But another knob we can tune is how many collisions we manage to make. And so what we're doing now is getting ready for the collider to go much faster, basically to have more protons in every bunch, and for those bunches to go faster and faster. And so we just get more collisions. And that means more collisions means a better chance that we'll see something interesting. But it also makes it really messy, because when you smash more protons together, you get multiple collisions at once sometimes, and you have to disentangle them, and the whole thing becomes a lot messier.
So, uh, what are the changes to Atlas? Is it just sort of like a preparation for just to have more data coming in and being able to sift out more data from these extra collisions that the superluminous Large Hadron Collider will be providing?
Yeah, there's sort of two categories of improvements. One is that, some stuff just got to get replaced because it's used up. Like the innermost detectors are very sensitive to radiation. And so every time we have a break, we take those down, we replace them, we put fresh stuff in. But then also we have to modify the setup so that it can handle this higher rates. And so, for example, one of the things that our group worked on is improving the way the data is collected to make it more robust and to make it faster. So we've like upgraded from some of our own custom built stuff, which worked okay, but was a little, joinky, and using sort of more commodity stuff that's more robust and, fiber based and this kind of stuff. So sort of like adding new cables and making things more robust and just making everything more solid, in general. And then also we're upgrading our computers because analyzing that data is going to be more complicated. They're going to be more intense, more complex, more stuff all the time. And so we're going to have to get ready to analyze that. Something else that I'm deeply involved in is developing tools to analyze the data. I'm in charge of the machine learning group at Atlas, which does things like, develop statistical tools to answer questions like, was that a Higgs boson or was it just two protons smashing together and sort of looking like a Higgs boson? And the thing that I'm really deeply sort of passionate about is figuring out ways to get more information out of our data, to like figure out exactly what is the statistical question we're asking and how do we best answer that question so we can like sneak as much information out of these experiments as possible.
So, do you have actually any examples of some of the systems that you've applied uh, to the computers to filter out sort of the background data?
Yeah, yeah, there's been a lot of really exciting developments in the sort of adjacent field of deep learning. These days, everybody's talking about deep learning. It's everywhere. It can learn to tell whether there's a cat in your internet video, et cetera. And over in particle physics, we realized that some of the tools, some of the ideas that were developed to make AI so powerful for other applications, like Siri being able to hear your voice and look stuff up on Google, could also be used for particle physics because a lot of it is pattern recognition. And it's not that exciting to tell, like, is there a cat in this internet video? We thought instead, let's apply this to like a question of deep importance to the universe, And something that happens in our data is that we get a lot of data. Like every time we have a proton collision, we take a picture of it. And that picture is basically signals that come out of layers and layers of detectors. And all in all, it's like 100 million pieces of information for every collision. That's a huge amount of information, and it's very difficult to analyze. So what we do historically, what we have done is we boil it down. We say, well, this part wasn't interesting, that part's not interesting. This part we can sort of summarize more succinctly, and we boil it down from like 100 million numbers to maybe like 20 numbers that describe like the path of the particles that came out. But I've long suspected that a lot of information is missing there, that, in reducing it from a huge dimensionality to something we can grapple with, we've probably lost something. So a few years ago, I worked with folks in the computer science department. I said, what if we just threw the data at the computer, not the full 100 million dimensional, but sort of like took a step back and gave it, 150 or 250 or 1,000 pieces of information? Could it do better than we can with our physics knowledge and intuition, where we've reduced this down to what we think is important? Can it extract more information than we were able to? And what we discovered was it could, and kind of a lot. So there's sort of a lot of missing information there that we were throwing away just because we couldn't handle it. But computers can handle it. And so we decided to set them loose on the data and use them to extract more information from each collision than we were able to.
That's really interesting. Now I'm gonna kind of move away from, I guess your day job, I guess, and move to the superhero background stuff that you work on outside of your daily particle physics work. And I guess the first one that I'm very interested in is CRAFIS, which is, if I know the acronym correctly, cosmic rays found in smartphones, which is a little which is an app for smartphones that you developed. Would you mind talking about that?
Sure. I have this tradition in my research group that I want to teach the students to be creative and to sort of think big. And so once a year or so, I'll tell everybody that they have, a few weeks to come up with a proposal for a new experiment. And there's no limit on how much it can cost or whether it's feasible to build or anything. I just wanted them to like practice thinking about, what question do I have about the universe and how would I get the answer? Even if getting the answer requires like building a black hole collider or whatever. It's just sort of good
Hmm.
practice. And we had a lot of fun coming up with and thinking about crazy ideas that would cost $1 zillion. But in one of these meetings, two of us came up with the same idea. So me and my student Chase Shimon at the time, he's now a postdoc at Yale, came up with this idea that maybe our phones could be used to detect particles, because something we do all the time at Atlas and at many particle physics experiments is that we detect the passage of particles by using thin sheets of silicon. Silicon is used in digital cameras also for this reason, that particles passing through them will like displace an electron. They'll like kick an electron out of where it lives. And then there's a little electric field that will slurp it up off to some collection region. And that's how you can tell that a particle has passed. And so we use that at Atlas all the time. And the way digital cameras work, like the digital camera in your phone, is the same way. It's just a little piece of silicon that detects the passage of particles, usually from photons. But we thought maybe it could be used to also see things from space, like muons and other particles that are raining down on us. And so over Christmas, so we were excited. We thought, oh, that's interesting. Let's try it. So over Christmas, we like cobbled together a quick little app, just sort of proof of printable. And we were able to see little particles sort of lighting up the detector. So if you cover the camera so that the phone is otherwise dark, right, then you should see nothing. You should see just black. But instead, what you see are these little blips, these little white pixels that indicate that a particle is passing through. And so that was super fun. We thought, wow, look, we can write an app that's a particle detector. That's cool. But it was sort of like, gee whiz. We were
Hmm.
wondering whether we could use it to like actually do science, because it turns out that there's a huge mystery in cosmic ray physics that nobody understands. And the mystery is, where are all these particles coming from? Like, we are being hit all the time. Our atmosphere is being hit all the time by really high energy particles, and nobody knows what's making them. These particles are crazy, crazy high energy, like so much higher energy than we can make at the Large Hadron Collider. And if you ask an astrophysicist, you ask them, what's the highest energy particle that should have ever hit the Earth or should ever even exist in the universe? They take like particles from supernovas and whiz them around black holes and all sorts of stuff, and they get a number. But we see particles hitting the Earth that are like 1,000 or 1,000,000 times more energy than what should be the highest energy particle ever. That's something interesting. That means that there's something out there capable of making like crazy high energy particles that we don't know about. And that's exciting.
Yeah.
Um, and so we thought maybe we could use these phones to sort of learn about those particles, because the problem with those particles is that they're really rare. Like they come, once per square, I think it's once per square kilometer per century or something. And so if you want to see a lot of them and figure out where they're coming from, you either need a lot of centuries or you need a lot of square kilometers. And there are detectors in South America and one in Utah that are dedicated to this, but they're not that big. And we thought maybe it'd be possible to link together the billions of smartphones that are already out there and running and have Wi-Fi and people taking care of them, and use that as like a Earth-sized detector to study these things, to like rapidly ramp up the number of square kilometers. So that was the basic idea.
Oh, that's actually really awesome. I'm thinking of so many similar-ish, I guess, experiments that I'm aware of. Like, my first thought was when you were talking about the smartphones. Oh, you could use it like triangulation almost to
Mm-hmm.
target it. But then I'm thinking, and then when you're talking about the overall telescope, well, like as a magnifying glass, I was thinking of the radio telescope arrays, right? That we can
Yeah.
use to pretty much take a picture. Well, we used it to take a picture of the black hole, for example. I guess would be
Mm-hmm.
a good example, and it's
Exactly.
almost
You
like a
can
big
tie
one.
together observations from
Yeah,
totally separate devices around the world to get a single picture.
yeah,
And that would be really cool. And if you have places where there's a lot of smartphones, like New York City or LA or basically anywhere like a school, then you can have enough devices that you can really get enough data. You can see what happens.
yeah.
And when a particle hits the top of the atmosphere, it creates this shower of trillions of particles that spread out
Mm.
over like a couple square kilometers. So these showers are pretty big, and so if you get like enough samples of it from having enough phones that happen to be in the shower, you can really figure out its direction and its energy and all sorts of stuff. So we've been working on this for a while. It's a fun side project. It's not the kind of thing like I have any money for. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
me and a couple of volunteers, and we got a little bit of money from a local foundation to pay for a grad student. So we're making progress on it, but it's slow going without any funding.
Yeah. Well, it sounds really, really cool. It like this would be something that I would be very interested in having on my iPhone. Uh,
Yeah.
but if I remember correctly, it's in beta currently, right?
That's
Um,
right. We just released a brand new version that's much improved. It has much higher efficiency. It uses the GPU on your phone to run faster, and it runs in the background so it doesn't overheat your phone. But currently, it's only available on Android, and it's in beta. And once we get some good data from that, then we're going to release it much more broadly. It turns out that Android is much easier to write apps for than iOS. iOS has
hmm.
many more regulations and requires you to use this like special programming language, whereas Android is much more open source and everything's in Java, so it's just sort of easier to crack into if you're not like a big development studio like we are.
Hmm. Well, I will put a link to the Crayfith webpage
Cool.
in the description of this in case anybody listening is interested and has an Android phone or just wants to read up on it because I
Yeah,
think it's
check it
really
out.
cool. I really enjoy those small I guess I like not all small, but those projects where you can definitely get the public involved with it. And I think this is one of them. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, we wanted people to feel like not just that they were donating their computer time, like with SETI at home, but they were actually like taking data. Their device is actually part of the experiment. And if we ever do some science with it, we figure like, hey, maybe we could just include everybody on the author list, like a paper with 80,000 people on it would be pretty awesome.
Oh, that would be one fun author page to read through. You'd print out the paper, and half of it would be the front cover. Well, so besides this, you have a few other projects. I think the next one we should talk about should be the PBS show that you're co-author for. Is that right, or co-producer?
Yeah, I think my
The
official
title.
titles there are I'm a co-creator and a co-producer, and I also wrote some of the episodes, so I'm also a co-author. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. It's fun to learn like a completely new thing. So when that opportunity came by, I was pretty excited to give it a try.
So was that something that actually would you mind talking about it, explaining what the show is?
Sure. So the show is called Eleanor Wonders Why, and it's a show on PBS Kids. So you can find it on Amazon or on the PBS Kids app or just on the PBS Kids homepage. And it's targeted to a very young audience, preschoolers, so 3 to 5 or 3 to 6. And the goal of the show is to encourage curiosity and scientific thinking among children. And the way we do that is that we have a fun cast of characters. The main character is a little bunny rabbit, and her two friends are a bat and an elephant, and they're very curious, meaning that when they see something about the world that they don't understand, they don't just let it go. They stop and they try to figure it out, and they ask questions until they do. And we teach scientific thinking by showing the characters solving the problem themselves, like finding the answer on their own. They don't just like ask a parent, hey, why do plants grow up and not sideways? They think of very simple experiments or little investigations they can do to get their own answers. Because we want to encourage kids not just to ask questions, but also to think about how would I answer this question? And so it's been a lot of fun. The first season came out last year, premiered on PBS, and it's been pretty popular. Got lots of support, and we're right now working on developing a second season of it.
That's great. Was it something that someone came to you and said, "Hey, Daniel, would you be interested in doing this?" Or was it something that you sort of reached out about or had knocked around before?
It's not something that was ever on my radar or like career plan, but a couple of years ago, PBS decided they wanted to broaden their stable of producers. They wanted to reach out and find people to make a new show that hadn't made a PBS show before. Outside of the typical players, like Fred Rogers and these really great studios that have done a lot of good stuff. And so they put out a broad call and they said, hey, anybody want us to pitch us a TV show? And so I've been collaborating with my friend Jorge Cham for several years on science explainers and on the books and videos and stuff. And he's a cartoonist, so he has the art skills. And so he said, let's put in a pitch. And so, we wrote a proposal for an idea. I had this idea for this show about these little characters, and he drew some amazing art for it. And we wrote a few example stories. And, you do this kind of thing in science all the time is you write proposals, you send them in, and you never hear back. And, 99% of the time it doesn't happen, and that's fine. So we sent it in, and I figured like, well, that's a shot in the dark, but who knows? And then we got a call from PBS, and they were like, we loved your proposal. Make the show. And we were like, what? Are you serious? Now we have to actually make this thing. I literally that afternoon I Googled how to make TV show because I mean, I'm not a TV executive. I have no experience in this business. That's what they were looking for. But we had to learn sort of as we go, like, how do you make an animated television show? Where does the money come from? Who does the actual drawing? How do you submit the results to PBS? And, who does the writing? And man, it was a lot of interesting stuff to learn about a whole new industry.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. And it seems sort of like an interesting way for your career to have sort of maneuvered in that direction.
Maneuvered. It's sort of like, more like an amoeba, just sort of like spreading in random directions as opportunities come up. But, one of the benefits of having tenure is that you do get to try new stuff and see how it goes. And I'm fortunate that my department at UCI is very supportive of science communication and public engagement. They see how important it is that the public understand why we're doing science and how we're doing it and how we're spending their money. So they're very supportive of this kind of stuff. And, it wasn't an opportunity I was going to say no to. So I just said, I'll just give it a try and see what happens. And, there were parts of it that were super fun and parts of it that were like kind of a headache. But that's with every project. And I also met some really amazing people I never, ever would have otherwise worked with. When you're a physicist and you're in academia, you sort of start interacting with like a certain slice of society. And for me, it's fun to like meet a whole new community of people who don't wake up and think about physics, like writers and animators and all these artists and really creative people. It was really refreshing.
Yeah, that honestly sounds like a really amazing experience to have.
Absolutely. Feel super lucky. Very privileged to get to work with all these wonderful people. Jorge, who's really inspiring, and then all the artists at the animation studio in Toronto. So it was a great time. I recommend it to anybody.
Well, is there is there like a PBS Kids page or something about the show?
Yeah, you can go to pbskids.org/Eleanor, ELINOR. The show's main character, Eleanor, is a cute little bunny, and she's modeled after the daughter of my partner and co-creator, Jorge Cham. So that's why it's spelled that way. That's her name. And you can go find information about it, on Wikipedia or on that website, or just watch the show.
Awesome. And there'll be a link down in the description for anybody who's interested as well.
Thanks.
And I guess talking about Jorge Cham, you have both been collaborating on a lot of stuff for a long time. I remember, I think one of the first videos that I ever watched to get into physics was the one about dark matter.
Oh, cool.
That you, because he does PhD comics, and you were the voice in it, or like you helped write it. I remember doing that and watching that in grade 6. And it was a long time ago, but it was one of the things that got me interested in physics. So I guess let's talk about this, and especially your 2 books that you've both written, or one of them that's out and one of them that isn't, and the podcast that you both have.
Yeah. Well, I was a young professor. It was like 2007, 2008. I just started my research at Atlas, and things were sort of moving along. And I saw a lot of, science communication happening, explaining what we were doing. But I felt like a lot of it was still kind of inaccessible. And I wanted to try something different. And I read a technical cartoon about how the Chrome browser was developed. And it was done by Scott McCloud, who's a famous cartoonist. And like, I'm not that interested in how browsers are written, but this cartoon made it interesting. And I thought, if you can take a technical topic and explain it with cartoons in a way that's accessible, and you can do that for something as boring as like software writing a browser, then you can do it for anything. And so I thought, well, let's try to do it for particle physics. Let's use cartoons to explain what we're doing. But I don't have the cartooning skills. And so my wife, who's also an academic, she's in biology, she said, well, why don't you email Jorge Cham and ask him? But, for those of you who don't know, Jorge is a cartoonist, but he's sort of like famous in the internet, in academia. His cartoons, PhD comics, are on every wall of every lab out there because he's really captured like the frustration of research and the experience of being a grad student. So saying like, why don't you email Jorge Cham was sort of like saying, hey, why don't you call up your buddy, Woody Allen and get him to write a movie about you or something. Like, it's just, don't just like cold email celebrities. But I was like, all right, sure. So I emailed him and he wrote back the next day and he was like, sounds like a fun project. Let's do it. So he came down to Irvine and just like asked me a bunch of questions about dark matter, and he recorded it for his own notes because we thought we were going to make a cartoon, like a comic book. But then later he was like, I listened to our conversation again, and I thought that actual audio was pretty fun. So he just edited down to an audio track and then added a video that he made. He did all this incredible art explaining what I was talking about. And that's how that first video came to be. And then we did another one about the Higgs boson and another one about extra dimensions. And some of them became really popular, went viral and got millions of downloads. I think the point of pride for me is that when they announced the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the Higgs boson, they give a list of like further reading, curious about the topic, check this out. And our video about the Higgs boson was linked to by the Nobel
Well, that's
Prize
awesome.
committee. I know. So I was like, hey, that's pretty good vindication right there. So that's sort of how we got started working together and collaborating. And we just sort of had fun working on these stuff together. The most important thing I think in life is figuring out what you like and who you are. And that's that you learn by figuring out like what's fun to do. And so I have fun doing particle physics and smashing particles together and doing all the machine learning stuff, but I also have fun working with creative people on other projects. And so in 2017, we decided to write a book about physics and explaining lots of the things that we do know about physics, but also lots of the things that we don't know about physics. There are lots of these like science explainer books that tell you everything science has learned, which is wonderful, and they're great books. But I thought it would be interesting to take a different approach and to say, like, look at all the things we don't know yet. Look at all the future discoveries. I wanted to inspire all the young people out there like you that there's a lot of physics left to do. It's not like us old folks have it mostly wrapped up. So then we wrote that book. It's called We Have No Idea.
I can
And
see it on my bookshelf right now.
oh, good.
Looking over.
And it's a little unusual also in the science explainer books in that it has a lot of like, bad jokes in it, lots of like dad jokes and puns. And my goal there was, I didn't want to give people the experience of being in the presence of genius, but not really understanding. And I feel like there are a lot of science books out there, which I won't name, which don't actually really explain everything very well, but just sort of give you the feeling that you're in the same room with those ideas. We wanted to like really break it down and explain it and make people feel comfortable. So that's why we put a lot of silly jokes, and Jorge did some great cartoons. And so we had a lot of fun writing it. Tackles big stuff like what's the universe made out of and what happened before the Big Bang and all the things that we don't know the answers to. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a great, I really enjoyed reading it. So I guess I'll put an Amazon link in the description, but
Yeah, thanks.
it's really good because I remember in my first year, I had the book on my wish list, and I had just gotten it for Christmas. And I'm walking down the halls talking to my friends, and one of them was like, "Hey, I found this really awesome physics book that you would really love." And it's like, "What's it called?" It's like, "Oh, it's called We Have No Idea. It's really good." It's like, "Oh
Oh,
yeah, I
that's
know. I've
nice.
been reading that one." So yeah, it's phenomenal. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thanks very much. You can also go to wehavenoidea.com to check it out or find links to order it. And after that book, we went around and we sort of gave presentations about the topics of the book and to audiences at various campuses around the country and a little bit around the world. And my favorite part of those presentations was the question and answer session. Like after you hear our presentation about how little we know about the universe, people really felt like empowered to ask any question about any topic they didn't know the answer to, which is wonderful. And we had a lot of fun. And I would answer the question and Jorge would like live draw an accompaniment as I answer the question. And, he's so clever and so quick. He would always like put up something that like made fun of me while I was talking, or, added depth to the question. And somebody in the audience saw us and said, "Hey, you guys are funny together. You should do a podcast." And so we said, "Sure, we'll give it a try." Why not? Everybody was making a podcast. We thought we'd give it a try. But these were folks from Stuff Media, which have a nice podcast network. So we sat down and recorded a podcast, and they said, "We like it." And so they decided to produce it. And 3 years later, and 300 episodes down, we've got a big stable of recordings out there, and topics from like, what's the universe made out of, to what's inside a black hole, to basically everything by now. And it's just two guys talking about science and having fun and joking around. It's in the style of our books. We try to be accessible. We try to not say anything that doesn't like make sense to a general person. But we also just try to like explore things we think are interesting and fun to talk about, because one of the reasons we got into physics, or I got into physics, was to get to tackle these things like how many dimensions are there in space, and how big is the universe, and the kind of stuff you think about when you smoke banana peels and sit on the roof for too long, that really motivates me. That's why I'm here. I want to know the answers to these big, deep puzzles. So we explore a lot of that in the podcast.
Yeah, I've listened to it. I really enjoy it. It's my going to school podcast, pretty much, for my long commutes. It's great, and I especially like the parts where you go out and talk to people about what do you think the topic is. So I was listening to the 3-body problem one today, actually, and it was this is COVID times. You had people doing it online, but still, I've listened to the other ones where you walk around campus and have asked people, "Hey, what do you think a 3-body problem is?"
I got into that because I was trying to calibrate. I was trying to understand, like, how much do people know about this question? Is the question itself confusing? Do they already have a bunch of ideas? As a physicist, you know more about this stuff than most people. You read more about this stuff. So it's hard to remember what the access level is. So that's why the first time I just walked around campus and asked random students, and, to my surprise, they all answered it. I expected like 99% of people would be like, "Shut up, go away." But they were like, "Sure, I'll answer random questions about physics into a microphone. No problem." They thought it was fun. And so to this day, like almost nobody says no. But then when the pandemic hit and campus shut down, I had to start emailing people instead, which is still fun, because now you get to hear like really interesting accents from people all around the world, and 3-year-olds and 99-year-olds. But I am looking forward to when campus opens up again in a month, to maybe walking around and asking UCI students, because there's something about that live back and forth that I also miss. Maybe I just miss maybe I also just miss talking to people live. So we'll see what happens this fall.
Yeah, well, I really enjoy your podcast, and I'd like to say it's phenomenal, and I'd highly recommend it to anybody who's listening to this one. If you like this podcast, you will love Daniel and Jorge Explain the Universe.
Yeah, thanks. Well, you can check it out. It's on everywhere podcasts are distributed, or you can go to our website, danielandjorge.com, and find links there.
And of course, as always, there'll be a link in the description. And finally, since today, if everything went appropriately when I was publishing the episode and I didn't mess anything up, this should be coming out August 1st. And tomorrow, you have a book coming out.
I think you mean November 1st. Otherwise,
Sorry.
We're time traveling.
Yes. I wrote down August on my sheet.
November 2nd, we have a second book coming out, and it's called Frequently Asked Questions About the Universe. And it really comes out of our experience on the podcast. On the podcast, I always say, if you have any question about physics or whatever, email me and I'll answer it. And that's true. And anybody can write to me, to my email address, or just to our podcast, to questions@danielandjorge.com. But what I found was that there are a lot of people asking similar questions, or these repeated questions over and over again. And so for the book, we thought, hey, let's answer those questions. Just like tackle these most commonly asked questions head on and do it in our style with silly jokes and cartoons and in a way that like, anybody from 9 to 99 should be able to answer. But we don't shy away from big questions like, can you travel through time, and is there life after death, and this kind of stuff. What would it be like to fall into a black hole? This kind of stuff. So it was really fun again to write with my friend Jorge. A lot of the humor comes out of our conversations and our joking around together. And it's coming out tomorrow, so check it out. You can find it online or go to universefaq.com to check out the webpage and find the links. I hope everybody out there enjoys it, and it inspires some people out there to maybe tackle some of those questions in their future career and answer them.
Yeah, I would highly recommend it. And again, I'm definitely gonna be purchasing it as soon as it comes out tomorrow. And as always, of course, there will be a link in the episode description.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we're kind of coming to the end of our time slot. So I've got 2 questions left here. Oh,
All right.
actually, I've got one because we've really kind of covered. I was going to ask about your scientific outreach, but I think you've really covered that when I was asking you all the other questions about sort of how you got into it, and you were talking about how it's something that you seem to enjoy, which I think is phenomenal. I think it really matters that people are out there talking about science.
Yeah, well, I just, want to explain to people what I'm doing and why it's so much fun, and hope that it resonates with some folks. And some people think, oh, that's cool, I want to do that too. Or, hey, that's cool, we should spend more money on physics. Maybe some congressperson out there listens to it and realizes, wow, that's a valuable way to spend some dollars.
Yeah. We always love more funding.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since we're coming to the end, first of all, I'd like to say thank you a whole bunch for agreeing to do this interview. It was a blast. But I have one last question for you. What do you think was the most impactful experience that you've personally had during your whole career in physics? Like, what sort of stands out to you as something that really affected how you've moved through your physics career?
It's a great question. And I think that the most interesting thing about somebody's path through their career is its randomness. Like I can go to 25 seminars and learn nothing. And then the 26th, somebody will say something which sparks an idea in me and leads to like an entirely new research direction. Or what if I hadn't had that meeting where we brainstormed the idea behind Crayfish? I never would have gotten started in that project. Or if I hadn't like emailed Jorge and started that whole line of work, like so many times a big project, which ended up taking up years of my time, I can trace back to an accident, a conversation I happened to have with somebody during coffee at a meeting that sparked an idea. And so the thing that I've learned is to be like open to that randomness, to go to seminars, even when you're pretty sure they're going to be useless, to talk to people, even if you don't think you have anything necessarily in common. And so I think my whole career is basically just sparked on that kind of randomness. My interest in machine learning comes from a talk I gave to a computer science department about like, what are we doing in physics these days? And there happened to be somebody in the audience, Pierre Baldi, who thought, hey, I think I know how to solve some of those problems with our deep networks, and came up to me afterwards, and boom, 10 years and like 30 papers later, here we are. So, I think the combination of all those random chances, it's like the classic sliding door thing, all the different universes you might have been in, led to where I am today. And, what's the one single most impactful thing that has like made an impression on me? I think something that motivated me to go into physics when I was young was that I hoped that it would be sort of transhuman. People who, like my wife, who study biology, super fascinating, very important, but in the end, fundamentally human. Like imagine you meet aliens. Are they going to be interested in, how our cells communicate to each other or how viruses work? Like probably not. Their form of life will be very different. I always hoped that the physics we were learning was going to be fundamental, universal, like beyond, human. These days, though, I realize that's probably not true. And so maybe the most impactful thing to me was actually the times I went and listened to philosophy of physics seminars, because we have a great department here at Irvine in philosophy of physics. And I slowly started to realize that everything we do in physics is sort of tainted by the human lens through which we look at the universe. And if we did ever meet aliens and they did do physics, they might not be impressed by anything we've learned, and they might not even be interested in anything we've learned, because they might just be human answers to human questions about the way humans see the universe. So in the end, I think all science is sort of by the people, of the people, and for the people. It's human through and through.
Well, thank you once again for coming on the show, Daniel. It was a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation and for the great questions. And thanks to all your listeners for listening to me blather on about my life and experiences for an hour. Appreciate all your patience and interest.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Quantum Mic. Big thank you to Dr. Daniel Whiteson for joining us this week. Join us next time for another episode of Relative Grace, where we will be talking about Lise Meitner, one of the discoverers of nuclear fission. You can follow The Quantum Mic on Twitter at @quantum_mic to stay up to date with the show. Let us know how we did by leaving a review and subscribing to the show. This episode of The Quantum Mic was hosted and produced by Owen Dara. The Quantum Mic podcast was created by Owen Dara, and the music used in this episode was created by Kevin MacLeod. Thank you for listening, and we will hear you next time on The Quantum Mic.